Right, in today's video we're going to have a look at how to do a no-dig gardening bed system, and some people know it as mulch bed systems, or Garden of Eden is another term that people use, but what it actually boils down to is no-dig gardening, and that has been done by nature for the past, I don't know, 4 billion years or so. So if you look at a forest, that's a very good example of no-dig gardening. Now in some cases, and I will explain this a little bit further later on in the video, it's going to take time to make a no-dig garden. Now in other places it's going to be like nearly instant, so we'll check that out now in a while as well in the video. But what I wanted to say is that no-dig gardening is so important, because if you can take control of your backyard where you're growing your vegetables and do it in such a way that is in harmony with nature, so you're creating enough food for all the different species. You have all sorts of different insects walking around on your soil, you have butterflies, you have flowering plants, you have lots and lots of food. What you're doing is you're creating a natural ecosystem that A, helps you with natural pest control, but B, also it's very vital for us humans, because we human beings of course are part of nature, and if we manage somehow to create these natural environments even in our backyard, we can actually be a lot healthier and a lot happier on this planet Earth. And this is actually what is missing. We need to create spaces that are not just lawns, but also natural biodiversity is actually happening. We're allowing nature to do its thing whilst we're getting our food as well. Ah my god, look at them fellas, them goats. This brings back loads of memories from when I was a kid. Goats breaking into places where they ought to not be. This is actually a fruit forest here, and they're eating some of these, they're eating actually a fruit tree there. I better stop them now. This is not good. These are the goats from the neighbor way over there, so we need to get them out of here. Alright, I want to first of all talk about soil and just get really in depth on how it actually works, because once you understand that, you will understand why no-dig gardening is like the thing to do. And the way it works is this: you have a thing called a soil structure, and the soil structure is a living being. You could just see it as a living being. And in this living being you have hundreds and billions of thousands of different types of living species. You have bacteria, you have fungi, you have all sorts of different insects, and you have nematodes, you have all these kind of different things. And these create a kind of a web or a soil structure. So some of them, for instance the fungi activity, you see, I just want to bring your attention to these fungi here. They actually, this is only the fruiting body, they form big webs of roots. Now these roots dig down into the soil and they hold together this soil like a sponge. But at the same time what they're also doing is they're attaching themselves to the roots of these plants and feeding these plants through symbiosis. So the plants are feeding the fungi, but the fungi are feeding the plants as well. And what is really interesting is that once that fungi dies away, it leaves behind passageways where air can actually get in there. And as soon as it rains, the rain goes into the soil and air gets sucked into the soil, and that's how the soil gets aerated. So it's actually being dug by just alone by this fungal activity, it's being dug by itself. But there's more to it than that. Plants of course also make lots and lots of tunnels, and once the plant roots die back, also you're creating tunnels as well. Now that becomes of course bacterial food as well. As soon as these break down and become like compost, it's small enough for bacteria to get in there. Another thing that's really interesting is if you see a kind of a no-dig gardening soil bed, what you're going to find is you're going to find a lot of critters living in it, walking on it. You have things like wood lice, you have things like worms, you have termites, different things like that in different places. And they will actually also start breaking down a lot of this kind of mulchy material. Now remember the fungi, they actually break down the lignin in these things like twigs. So they get in there and they really start breaking it down, and they're using that of course to feed themselves but also feed the plants. But once they've broken down the lignin, it's actually accessible to the critters. They can start breaking it down. Now when they poop out, their excrement becomes also of course bacterial food as well. And this is one more thing that I wanted to mention as well. what you have here is plants exude certain sugars, of course, and these sugars grow bacteria. Now the bacteria, when they poop out, I've mentioned it so many times before, becomes nutrients for the plants, water-soluble nutrients for the plants. So as you can see, there's an entire, it's not just that plants are growing in soil and they're taking up nutrients, it's actually a symbiosis between this whole food web. Now the minute a leaf drops on this food web, it becomes food for the plants indirectly through the action of fungi, bacteria, worms, all this kind of web of life. And it's just a wonderful thing to feed the plants, but also to kind of prevent any of this soil from eroding away. And this is the biggest problem that we're actually having at the moment, is that this soil is, most modern agricultural soil is actually being eroded away and just ends up in the sea, and all these nutrients are gone. So a lot of our farmland is becoming, we're getting less and less good farmland, and we're having more and more people to feed. So this is the solution of the future. I don't say this lightly. Work with nature, that's how you do it. Hope that explained that anyway. Okay, we go on now to looking at how to actually make a no-dig gardening bed as well. Okay, just something kind of off topic here, just quickly. I just want to show you this, because this is my first ever pumpkin that I ever grew in India. So I'm like really over the moon. It's like discovering everything all over new again. It's really cool. I just put this stone on it so that it doesn't rot. So I can't wait. I have a feeling it's going to grow, because it's already, that stage when it kind of, either falls off or it makes it. I think it's beyond that falling off stage, so I'm really pleased. That basil is okay too, actually. Anyway. Okay, the thing I'm doing here now is I'm trying to create a very large no-dig bed. I'm actually doing a lot of no-dig beds. That's more the vegetable section. Over here I'm going to do a flower section. Okay, I'm going to have some pumpkins in here as well, some papaya and a red amaranth, but I also want to do a lot of kind of different flowering plants just in front of this house here, the front here, which is kind of a nice place to have a lot of herbs and flowers and such things. But this is a great example of a no-dig gardening bed. What I did here is I took out all the weeds. I put them on the compost heap. I'll show you that now in a short while. But the main point here is that I'm trying to, because this is very sandy soil, the minute it starts raining, there's going to be a lot of splash up onto the plants, and you probably can't see it here. I'll do a close-up just now. But what you usually see is then this kind of splash up, and it harms the plant. So a lot of those nutrients also get washed away. So by putting this kind of compost on, of course I'm protecting the soil from that kind of thing. And don't forget, I'm also of course feeding the plants indirectly, like I mentioned earlier as well. So this is all there really is to no-dig gardening. It's very simple. You basically just clear the soil and put a certain type of mulch on top. And now it can be bark mulch, it can be grass clippings, it can even be weeds if it's a dry season. But as mentioned, I didn't want any of these weeds here. And the reason again is because I didn't want them to resprout. Because we're supposed to be having a monsoon, which still hasn't happened. So of course, all of nature at the moment is all messed up. That's actually a good point. I wanted to ask you, can you tell me how in your living area, just in the comment section, write a note where you live, roughly, not exactly, and how has the weather been in the last 10 years? Just, I'd love to find out. I think this is very vital for us to actually get a sense, because people from all over the world are watching these videos. We can actually I'd love to get a sense of how the weather is, how badly the weather is doing. Just your honest opinion. It depends on what kind of soil you have, on how long it's going to take before your no-dig gardening bed is going to take effect. And the more kind of finer the particles of your soil are, the more kind of work you're going to have to do, or nature's going to have to do, for it to actually become a kind of a well aerated, a well dug bed by nature. All the life forms are digging that soil, holding together particles and binding them together. And it boils down to basically, if you have sandy soil, of course the particles are really, really big, so whenever it rains you're going to get air into the soil. And what you need in order to have life in the soil, you're going to need air, you're going to need water, and you of course need nutrients in the form of mulches or leaves falling or whatever way you're going to do it, decaying bodies even. That's what you need, and that's how it kind of works. Now if you have clay soil, the particles are so fine and they bond so well together that it's very hard for nature to start digging it. So it can take up to 8 years before, in heavy clay soil, it can take 8 years of no dig gardening before you actually start getting really, really good results. And who's going to wait for that? Who's going to do that? Now what I have done, in Ireland I've done a lot of no dig gardening, and we have really terrible heavy clay soil. So what I used to do is, I used to do a kind of a mulching system just like here, but what I would do is I'd use the fork and I would just kind of go like this, shake it up a bit, you know, so at least it's breaking up and getting a bit of air in there, but it's not completely destroying the soil. Because you can actually, in heavy clay soil, it's, in some senses it's actually better to just really dig it every time, dig it, dig it, dig it, because you're also not losing as many nutrients as you would with sandy soil, because the particles are so binding as well. They hold the nutrients. So that can be a good way. So maybe in clay soil you might not even want to do no dig gardening, but I used to do it, and I found all of nature, all of my garden was really like alive, you know. So and I got a good solution with that fork thing as well. Now I just wanted to do an update on the Zola. Now the Zola, I had really bad luck, because what happened is, actually when I put the Zola in here in the pond, when it rained it just washed it all down, and there's a gully way over there, and it washed it out of the gully into the next spot, and it actually took pretty well over in that area, but I wanted it to actually stay here. So what I've done is I made a kind of a rope connection with some bottles, and the rope is floating on top of the, about 80% of it is floating on top of the water, maybe 50 at the moment, but it's designed to keep most of that azolla in when it starts raining. And up here anyway, it's been kind of sticking here even though it's rained, and it's starting to spread out now if you see the green patches. So touch wood, we might actually end up having a lot of azolla coverage soon, and I might move it out. Maybe I make another floating kind of rope. I maybe do a better job this time with a net or something, and then we'll have this whole area covered in azolla. Now azolla is wonderful because you can harvest it and stick it into the planting hole where you're going to plant your vegetables, and it's just an extra nitrogen fertilizer for free. That's great. Just an update there. Now one of the best ways you can possibly work in harmony with nature is to copy it to such an extent that you just only have to observe to see what is nature doing. You just have to do the same thing. So that's what we've done here. Look, I've planted this banana, if you remember, about 4 months ago, and I put down a layer about that thick of compost as well, and I put some compost in the hole as well so it gets enough nutrients. But this compost now is nearly broken down. There's only about that much of a layer on top of it now, and the rest of it is just this amazing soil. It's broken into, it's mixed already with, I don't know if you can see that, it's mixed together with the sand. It's become wonderful and amazing smelling compost as well. That's, by the way, a good way to tell if it's good or not. This is one of the best soils I've ever smelled, seriously. And why is this working so well? It's a very simple way where you have, these are the weeds that are actually basically protecting the soil from sunlight, but at the same time, in the morning and the evening and during the night, they are dew collectors. There's a lot of humidity here. We have 60 to 80% humidity. nature's doing the same thing, even in like places like Switzerland where you get 30% humidity. It's like a collecting pad of dew, which it takes it and it stores it and brings it down to the soil level. And when you have shade, when you have moisture, those are the optimum conditions for making compost. And you have soil, of course. So this is actually a wonderful way to let nature do what nature does best. So you have a mulch and a living mulch as well. So these two combinations are really, really important. So whenever you're doing a kind of a mulching thing, try to have your crop, which is in this case a banana, but also try and have something like fast growing, like a bean or something like that. As you can see here, this is actually a bad example. I have better examples of bananas with beans around, but only 2 or 3 beans actually made it. But you still have all these weeds as well, so I'll just let the weeds grow instead, and it's working really perfectly. And all I have to do is once in a while take away some of these weeds and just give it enough of a gap, but not too much, because I don't want it drying out as well. And that's just a really good example how nature does it. Okay, now I didn't want to give the impression that you're never going to dig your garden beds. You can, of course, if you're smart and using kind of crop rotations and things like that, you can of course plan in some kind of digging in somewhere within year 5 or so in the crop rotation. So you're not digging constantly, but once in a while you do, especially if you have like root crops, or like potatoes, a good example. Or you have this sweet corn here, which I had to earth up. Now I could have used mulch as well, but I wanted to earth it up with soil because I didn't have that much mulch, because I'm going to use it for all these garden beds that I'm making as well. I don't want to use it for this, especially because this whole thing with the sweet corn, as you probably know already, is an experiment, and I don't know if it's going to work. Yeah, but otherwise, one actually cool way of doing a kind of a no-dig gardening bed with a root vegetable would be, for instance, if you have a bit of land and you put down that much of a layer of straw, which would suffocate away, and maybe some cardboard as well, that suffocates away the actual weeds. Then within about 3 weeks later, what you do is you open up holes into the cardboard and you stick a potato in there, close it again. By the time the potatoes grow up higher, you have a certain quantity, it's not much now, you have a certain quantity of potatoes actually growing under the mulch or in the mulch. That's actually a good way of growing some potatoes. But the trick with that is that if you're planting a potato in that kind of system, you're going to have to plant them closer together. So you need about like a 1 on 2. So you're going to get twice as many potatoes from the amount you plant. Now with the kind of earthing up method, you're going to get like 10 to 1 ratio of potatoes. So it's kind of in a way better to use kind of a digging method in that case. Just wanted to mention that as well. Now, for those of you who don't know, I actually use this compost area here to burn away a lot of the weeds. So compost can actually burn a lot of weeds away and feed your soil as well. Take it away and then you can plant straight into that as well. I wanted to mention that as well. Right, I wanted to talk about the different materials that you can actually use on top of your garden beds, and of course the easiest way is kind of to break them down into high carbon, high nitrogen content materials. Now all materials that were once alive have both nitrogen and carbon, but some have like a load more nitrogen, like the ratio is much higher in nitrogen than other materials. The nitrogen might be much lower to the carbon content. So like bark mulch has like 300 to 1 carbon to nitrogen, whereas urea might have a 6 to 1 carbon nitrogen ratio. And why is this important? Well, the thing is, it's very easy to say that the soil structure that we talked about has of course different living things in there, like your fungi and your bacteria. And fungi will like things that are more high in carbon content. So if I start putting bark mulch on top of my soil, what's going to happen? The fungi are going to be way happier. Now when the fungi are way happier, they're going to tweak the soil more towards what they like, which is acidic condition. Bacteria do the same thing in the opposite scale. They tweak it towards alkalinity by exuding this bioslime. It's very alkaline. When we're talking alkalinity, like the spectrum is only between 5.5 and 7.5. Like it's not going to tweak it that much, but it makes a difference enough that if we find we have a lot of alkaline soil, and we want to grow something that likes a lot of acidic soil like blueberries, well, we can actually throw on loads of bark mulch and tweak the soil over a few years, and it will become more acidic, if that makes sense. So that's important, because you can actually then play around with as well different materials what you're going to use. Now, talking about the Garden of Eden, or the Back to Eden method, that's a method where you just basically go to your local landscape gardener and say to him, here, listen, I know you're dumping all this bark mulch from all your tree clippings that you've already chopped up and everything, and it's costing you money. Why not just dump it on my bit of land, and I'll take it for free, and I'm happy because I can use it. And what they do in this method is they just use that alone. They put it like a big thick layer of that on top of the soil. Now that only works if the material that you're getting, the bark mulch that you're getting, has very, very fine particles as well. And the reason for that is because that's in the laws of kind of composting, you need to have not only a carbon nitrogen ratio, but the fine particles will decompose really, really fast, making that nitrogen as well available. So what you're actually doing then is you're kind of making like a compost heap. And I wanted to show you this method here. This is actually just making a compost and then growing stuff in the compost. So you could do just the very same thing without having, if you can't get the bark mulch, you can actually do this as well, providing that there's like soft materials like things like high nitrogen materials in there, like hay, straw, weeds, vegetable clippings, things like that will actually they will break down very, very quickly, becoming compost very fast. The woody material would still take a year or so to break down, but that is enough for the plants to actually start growing. And that's why this Back to Eden method, Garden of Eden method, whatever it's called, can actually work as well. So that's just, they've just taken a step further. They don't actually just mulch it like we do, they actually just plant into the compost heap, which is what I've done here as well, which is working really, really well as well. All that tapioca is growing really well, and eventually I'll have all this compost as well to plant, put around the garden and plant into. Now I hope you enjoyed that video. Now please do let me know what the climate is like in your area, because I really wouldn't mind actually finding out. So do let me know, let us know, and it'll just be interesting to see if climate change is happening or not. Ran out of breath there. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Check out that bird, eh? Wow, he's cool, huh?